Everyone's talking about the iPhone 17 Pros, the Galaxies, titanium this, AI that, the thinnest phone, blah blah blah. But what if you don't have $9 million in your bank account? What if you open your wallet and you literally have nothing in there? Well, then there's the used market with unlimited options. Which got me thinking, if you were to save up $100 for a used phone, which one should it be? An Android or an iPhone? Because at this budget level, the differences between these phones can be enormous. The thing is, if you go for Android, you technically can get something new like the Galaxy A07, which in some countries could be a complete lifesaver, but in the UK, it is kind of pointless. I would rather eat my chair than have to use that phone as my daily driver. Meanwhile, with iPhones, you can't just rock up to an Apple store expecting some kind of a bargain. Apple used to sell the cheaper iPhone SE models, which started at £400, which made the entry to the iPhones way more accessible to more people. And now that the cheapest iPhone is like £600, they made the entry point so much higher that for a lot of people, the iPhone is not even a viable option unless you go for a used one. So after around 6 minutes and 67 seconds of research, I concluded that for around £100 you can get yourself a Galaxy S20 FE or an iPhone 11, and both come with warranty. So I picked up both in complete opposite colors so that the thumbnail would be a lot flashier. See? 2 steps ahead, and tested them head to head. But before I did, I realized that I lost my keys. Okay, no problem, I'll just play a sound. Oh, they were in the bin the whole time. And I found them thanks to UGREEN, who are sponsoring this video, and their FineTrack finders. So these finders are made to help you keep track of your things like your keys, your bags, or basically anything that goes missing. And they have extra loud alerts, so it'll be easier to find them. The Find Tracker 2 and the mini version both work with the Apple Find My, so it's as simple as opening the app, pressing a new item, holding the on button for a couple of seconds, and boom, it's connected. They have the battery life of 5 to 7 years, which is far longer than the Apple AirTags. So you can put it in this little case, clip it to your keys, and completely forget about it. Especially because this has the IP68 rating, which means that rain is not a problem. Both these trackers also have these high-vis accents that glow in low light, so it's easier to find them in the dark. And if you want something that also works with Android, there's also the FineTrack Duo, which works both with Google Find Hub and Apple MyFind. It charges with USB-C and lasts up to 12 months per charge. So if you want a peace of mind, there's options, so check the links down below. Both of these phones are in a very weird situation because they're both old enough to be cheap, but not so old that they're completely useless. The iPhone 11 came out in 2019, and please explain, how has that been almost 7 years? But back then, this was such a gangster phone. When they released this advert and they showed the ultra-wide camera in action, I was like, bruh, take all my money. But at the time, I didn't have any, so. And the Galaxy S20 FE is the fan edition of the original S20, but that's kind of funny because if this one is for the fans, then who's the original for? The enemies? But this was basically Samsung saying, fine, you want a bigger screen, a bigger battery, expandable storage, and a more affordable price? Fine. Take it. Just stop complaining. Which meant that as a result, Samsung have accidentally made one of their most iconic phones ever and sold over 10 million units in just over a year. And what this means is that on paper, this absolutely claps the iPhone's cheeks in terms of specs. Yet somehow I still see loads of people walking around with their iPhone 11, so what's going on? Is the iPhone 11 secretly a better phone? So let's start with the screen, and I don't know how to say this nicely, but the Samsung absolutely mops the floor with the iPhone. Samsung gets you the 120Hz 6.5 AMOLED screen that to this day looks just as juicy as a steak and as buttery as a lobster. Whereas this iPhone is 60Hz, it's LCD, and it's lower resolution, and it still has this big ass notch just reminding you how old this thing is, whereas this still has the camera cutout, which reminds you how kind of modern this still feels. To be fair, I wouldn't call the iPhone screen bad, but in comparison, it definitely looks a little bit outdated. So the point for design and screen definitely goes to Samsung. But it gets even more embarrassing because the base iPhone 11 comes with 64 gigs of storage, which sounds ancient considering that the new iPhones come up to 2 terabytes of storage. Who the hell even needs that much storage? Just for context, I loaded a backup from my main phone to this iPhone 11 and without any games or even without any pictures, it chewed up through 41 gigs of storage. This amount of storage definitely makes you feel handicapped, even more so because the Samsung comes with 128 gigs as a base, and not only that, it has expandable storage, so you can literally double the storage for like £20. Rest in peace storage and RAM prices. But yeah, the point definitely goes to Samsung. So far this just feels wrong. It's like these two phones do not belong in the same room. However, do you see this cool glass effect? Yes, that's right, this phone is still able to run the newest iOS 26. Apple took this almost 7-year-old phone and just slapped the newest software, and in a weird way, it still kind of feels modern. I have these dark icons with no labels and the layout looks basically identical to my main phone. I can still touch my tip with my other tip or my friend's tips, and it does this weird thing where both of the phones get like really excited. Every time I pick up this phone, the Mac recognizes it and tries to do its thing and mingle. And in a way, this gives me reassurance that yes, I could still use this phone. I did kind of feel like I was missing out on the camera control button and the action button, but listen to what I'm complaining, literally nonsense. It's a completely different story on Samsung because this phone caps out at Android 13, which is already 3 years behind, even though this phone came out a year after the iPhone. Now that's not a huge deal, you're not missing anything major, and it's not like the apps are broken or unsupported or anything. Yet. But it's just knowing that you don't get the same updates as the newer phones, knowing that the customization is not as good as it could be, knowing that the phone can't reach the full potential that it could, kind of makes it feel like you're missing out. Whereas here, you're getting the absolute full potential of this phone. It's squeezing every last bit of juice out of this. And again, that just gives you reassurance that you can just keep going with this. It's probably not going to get the new iOS 27, but even then, this is gonna outlast the Android regardless. Technically, you could install some custom ROM and prolong the life of this Android and get that sweet customization, but realistically, most of the NPCs are probably not gonna do that, so I'm gonna give a point to iPhone just for having that longevity out of the box. Now, strangely enough, the Samsung looks newer and is completely dominating the specs, but the iPhone feels newer, which begs the question, what about the performance? Which phone feels more usable? So everyone would just run a Geekbench score and be like, oh, this phone is a lot faster. So I did just that, and I found that the iPhone has a much faster single core score, which arguably is the most important thing that determines how snappy your phone is gonna be. Now, unfortunately to Samsung, this was the Exynos chip, and to get the Snapdragon one, you'd have to get the 5G model, and even then, according to these benchmarks, that would only affect the multi-core score, and now, after all these benchmarks, I don't even know what I learned. But flicking through the phones like a normal human, I found that both of the phones are roughly the same speed, and ironically, despite having more RAM on the Samsung, I found that some apps have to reopen more often on the Samsung for some reason. But I didn't even know this, but on Android, you can actually scroll Instagram way faster than the iPhone. So on paper, the iPhone wins, but in a real world use case, I think simply for that really good AMOLED 120Hz screen, you would just have more joy and pleasure using this. So I'm gonna give a point to Samsung. But what about the camera? Because on paper, the Samsung completely dominates this. It has a much bigger main sensor, it has a bigger ultra wide, and it even has a 3x optical zoom camera, which, you know, be it it's pretty useless, but it still has one, which is not looking good for Apple. So in good lighting conditions, you will see that the Samsung looks better just because it has that zoom sensor, but as soon as the light drops, that zoom sensor is kind of useless because the camera doesn't even switch to it. It's not even good enough, so instead it just stays on the main sensor. And yeah, Samsung has all the pro modes. You can download Gcam, you can even download motion cam and record raw videos, which are not gonna be the most stable. But I think most people would just prefer the consistency of the iPhone's camera, especially in video mode, especially in these low light conditions, because the iPhone clearly wins. Also, the optimization of the camera on social media is just gonna be better. Especially at this budget, the camera optimization and Android, these two words don't go well together, so I'm gonna give a point to the iPhone. Now, when it comes to battery, this one is a little bit weird. The iPhone that I got said that the battery is not verified, most likely because the battery is not a genuine one from Apple. And in the settings, it does say that it's 100%, but how can I trust that if it's not verified? And speaking of trust, I don't really trust this screen, because if I run my fingers against the edges, it feels kind of sharp, almost like someone misplaced the screen replacement or something. And this phone just kind of gives me bad vibes because it kind of feels like it's gone through a lot of hands. Samsung battery is like 50% bigger, but without a battery health indicator, how am I supposed to know how good this is going to be? It's been out for like 6 years. And because the iPhones tend to be more power efficient, and the fact that the Samsung has to power a larger 120Hz screen kind of shrinks that battery gap a little bit, and I think at this point, the number doesn't really matter. So on one hand, you can get an iPhone with 100% battery health like it says in the settings, and you can just get a legit replacement from Apple themselves, which, you know, it costs almost as much as the phone itself. I'm sure there's probably a lot of dodgy places that can do it cheaper, but on the other hand, you can just get an Android with an insanely big battery with super fast charging, and it's gonna have USB-C, so I think the point goes to Samsung. So at this point, Android is clearly winning, but just to make sure, I did a poll on YouTube just to see what people would pick within this budget. And after over 2,000 votes, Android massively won with 67%. And reading through the Android side actually made a lot of sense. People would rather pick Androids because they can install new software, new operating systems, and it will make the phone feel like it's brand new again, as well as the ability to sideload apps. Or how in that price range, Androids just have way more options, and going for the iPhone would mean a worse option because of how well the iPhone's resale value holds, which means you'd have to go for the older model. So basically, the biggest advantage for Androids for this price is choice. And on the iPhone side, there's just a better and longer software support, or just how some people don't care about any of the hardware and they just want an all-round good experience. So the Android people had more specific reasons like hardware and freedom, and the iPhone people had more emotional reasons like trust. And in my opinion, despite owning an iPhone, if I just had $100 to spend on a new phone, I would definitely go for an Android, mainly because of how much choice I would have. I could get the Pixel 6a that's still gonna get the newest Android 17. I could get the OnePlus 8 Pro, which visually and hardware wise is just gorgeous. Or if I decided that the performance and battery is all that I need, I could just get like a used Poco X6 Pro. With a small budget, I could decide exactly where my money is going and what matters to me the most. If my dad or my grandma or my brother's dog's cousin needed a new phone and they didn't give a rat's ass about the specs or anything, suddenly the iPhone is kind of a tempting choice. Now, maybe I understand why I see so many iPhone 11s out and about. They are old, they don't have the newest features, but at the same time, they don't feel abandoned. You click one button and suddenly you're on the newest software, and it still feels like an iPhone. And yeah, compared to the iPhone 17 Pro, it does feel severely handicapped, but it still feels like it belongs in the same world. And it's that peace of mind that makes people not care as much. So let me know what you think in the comments. Which phone would you rather pick if you only had $100? And yeah, subscribe, help me reach 100 billion subscribers, and yeah, see ya.